Hello, welcome to another episode of Leadership Synergized. I'm Kevin Smith, and I'm excited to bring you today Dr. Jerry Mason, Dr. Jerry Mason, who earned his doctorate in educational leadership, focusing on organizational management recently. And we're going to talk a lot about his study because it was an excellent research study and just a wonderful defense. And we're going to get into that. Dr. Mason has a number of years of leadership at a variety of levels, and he brings a lot of experiences, and I'm sure some lessons learned he's going to share as well. So I'm excited for you as we spend these next two episodes today and then in 1 week with Dr. Jerry Mason. Dr. Mason, my friend, good day. It's great to see you, and thank you so much for being here.
Good afternoon, Dr. Smith. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. How are things?
They're going very well. They're even better being able to see you there on the other side of the camera, if you will, and a little bit different than a number of episodes that I have. I'm just excited to talk to you about your experience with that doctorate, that EDD, that educational doctorate program. And right before we started on air here in our recording, you were talking about a holiday coming up and how relieved and how nice it was to have all that behind you. Share a little bit about your experience and what led you towards gaining your doctorate.
Oh, wow. The interesting thing is, I think I was originally a college dropout. So leading up to getting the doctorate, it's a bit of a contrast. I spent 11 years of my adult life in higher education. What led me to it is a couple of things. One is I have a passion for the subject of leadership and the activity of it, what it means, what it is, the development of people, and being able to have the credibility to develop people, to teach, to coach. And then maybe another component of that is maybe a bit of retirement planning. My wife and I have agreed that I'll never quit. I may change job functions and roles, but one of the things that I love to do is to teach. So I'm forecasting in my future as a retirement job, moving into a university or something and teach a retirement job or a closing job. I don't know what you want to say to the end of that chapter, but establishing my credentials and opening up the door to be able to do that was one of the things that was front of mind for the journey.
Excellent. We'll dive further into your study as we go through our program this week and next week. Share a little bit about who Jerry Mason is and a bit about your path. You mentioned education, and I know you're tied into manufacturing environment today. Share and introduce for our viewers and listeners, who is Dr. Mason?
I have worked in a variety of international companies over the last 25 years with experiences ranging from operations, warehousing, logistics, manufacturing, production, accounting, sales, purchasing, distribution, pretty much everything but marketing and engineering. And I was speaking with someone yesterday, and it really, I became aware that my current role is a culmination of everything that I've experienced over the last 25 years. And in that pathway, I may have been a manager in a sales department or an accounting department or purchasing department for a season. And now I'm in a role where I have 13 different departments under me, and every one of them, I could check mark a box off on my path to get here that I've served in that discipline at some time in my career. So what I told the gentleman was, I'm not smart enough to design that pathway. Somebody bigger and better than me laid out those footsteps, but just looking over my shoulder and seeing that journey was a very neat reflection.
Yeah, you hit upon something near and dear that to me I've really taken to heart and learned in the past maybe 2 decades, so to speak, is that it is the journey. You mentioned the word journey. It's the journey where we come together in that maturation of life, if you will, and the growth and development of where things begin to flare up a bit, where we learn the mistakes we made earlier or learn why we were successful or created significance opportunities. And then we have this point of life. And I think that's what I hear you describing, Dr. Mason, to where we can deploy those experiences with a little more confidence and peace of heart based on our life and experience in that aspect.
Yeah, that's so true. If you had asked me 15 years ago if I was a good leader, I would have told you yes. But looking over my shoulder now, I can see so much more development that I needed and that I progressed into during that time period to make me who I am now. So you never stop learning. The journey never stops. As you mentioned, less than a month ago, 20 days ago to be exact, walking across the stage to finish the process of getting my doctorate was a huge milestone in my life to close that chapter. But I'm not done learning. The journey doesn't end there. It's a lifelong journey of development and education in some form or facet, even if it's not in an academic classroom.
Dr. Mason, you mentioned that you were in education, I think you said for 10 or 11 years, the higher ed piece, and now you're in manufacturing. My experience is just the reverse. I was in manufacturing for 24 years and moved to public education and experienced higher education. And when I reflect back and individuals ask me, I'm really considering this career or this career, what do you recommend? My first question is take a look at where you want to be maybe in 10 or 15 or 20 years, and then consider going in the opposite direction for the first 3 to 5 years, because I have to tell you, the experiences I had in manufacturing that I brought to education, huge, just a huge piece. And I'm sure you feel the same way, just in a reverse form.
Yeah, that's true. I usually tell people, number one, find what it is that makes you happy. And don't do something just for a paycheck or just because you think someone else has that expectation of you. But what are you passionate about? What can you wake up in the morning and be happy to go to work to do, rather than have the stereotypical Sunday night dread of fearing the next day, that Monday morning dread? What is it that would take for you not to have that? And I think that's the starting place. And if you start there, then I think the rest of the journey will start, the roadmap will start becoming more clear.
Said my friend. Looking back, Dr. Mason, when did you first recognize that leadership was something in your blood or something you wanted to really pursue?
That's a good question. I think even going back to younger years as a teenager or an early adult, leadership, there's certain facets of leadership that just come natural to me. My dad used to tell me that I would argue with the stop sign. It took me a few years to figure out that wasn't a compliment, but that willingness to step up and that willingness to talk and to collaborate and to negotiate was a bit natural for me. And so I think it was a good segue to move into a leadership position. I didn't necessarily seek out my first leadership position. It sought me. And after giving it consideration, it was something that I was interested in pursuing. And after I got a taste of what that really meant, or what I thought it meant at that time, I just kept going from there.
What was your first leadership role?
My first leadership role was a team leader position inside a Toyota company warehouse. I moved off of a forklift and took a role as a team leader over a team of 6 people.
Dr. Mason, when I look back over the blessings I've had, I would look at you and look at anyone that's watching and listening. I have not deserved the opportunities I have had. I don't know where they came from. But when I look back, I'm quick to understand where I've been humbled at. And I don't have enough fingers on my hand, especially in those early points. Talk a little bit about your experience when you were leading and you felt that first time of being humbled a little bit. What created that? And then what did you learn and take away that you may continue to utilize today in your role?
I think one of the first experiences of humility as a leader is when you make your first big mistake. When you have a decision and you make it, and then there's no one else responsible for it but you. That's a true awakening. Owning that is necessary. And one of the mistakes I see a lot of would-be leaders make is they don't own the responsibility that they have. So I think owning that responsibility, owning the mistake, and then learning from it is paramount to future success. If you don't do those things, then the steps that follow are going to be very difficult.
Great words of wisdom, Dr. Mason. And one thing I hear a bit embedded there that, quite frankly, and I know we'll deep dive further the remainder of this episode in a bit and/or next week when you're back with us, that you got into in your study. It really just is amazing at times where leaders continue to do this when the chips are down instead of right here in this aspect. And it boggles my mind because over the past 20, 30, 40 years, leaders like leadership experts like Dr. Stephen Covey, Dr. John Maxwell, even going back, Coach John Wooden, whom I credit for his pyramid of success and some of the foundational pieces that really build in today's environment. I'm amazed and I ask, why haven't we learned more in those areas? Because research shows people are going to follow those who take full responsibility when it's on them and who, in many ways, provide a little bit of cover for the team in that regard. Give the successes to the team, but take the blame right here.
Yeah, I think it comes down to what I would say is a gross misconception on what leadership is. Many people, I believe, are afraid that if they're a leader, that they cannot present themselves as vulnerable or as real. If they make a mistake, they've got to hide it because they're the leader. They shouldn't make a mistake. And I think true leadership is quite the opposite of that. True leadership is that public ownership of, I'm sorry, team, I made a mistake. I did this exact thing about a week and a half ago with 15 different managers at my place of employment. I stood in front of them and I told them, we need to correct something. The reason it's wrong is my fault. I gave you bad direction. I missed some key elements. So I apologize. Let's fix it together. And didn't have one complaint, at least not to my face. But I think those are the things that earn respect and that help build rapport. And then alternatively, I think there's this idea that maybe people don't truly understand what leadership is, so they get lost in just managing, not knowing that there's uniquely a difference between management and leadership.
Said, and something that jumps out at me, and I appreciate you going there and sharing that story. And I concur with you. And coming up in an era, the 1960s, the world, the Vietnam War, and the civil rights activities that were taking place, things changed a lot. When I became a teenager in the 1970s, it was, you don't take this out of the house. You don't admit you're wrong, especially when you're a man, right? You got to absorb that, toughen up in that piece. I have to tell you, it's been a difficult walk for me to gain the level of vulnerability I have today. And I'm not bragging by any stretch, but to your point, leaders who try to hide their vulnerability, in my view and my experiences, really just move farther away from their people rather than move closer to them.
I fully agree with that. And I must admit that I didn't get where I am today without a ton of mistakes to learn that lesson. So I wish I could go back 25 years and restart some things and do a few chapters differently, but I can't. The future just has to be brighter by more intentional leadership and better decision making. But you're so right. There's this cultural aspect to perception of leadership that has been historical and still bleeds over into modern day society. It's interesting, if you study Robert Greene's servant leadership, he did the seminal work for servant leadership back in the 70s. We're 40 years removed from him first initiating the terminology of servant leadership. And there are still people today, if you use the term servant leader, it's a blank stare because they don't know what that means. And I have people ask me, why are there so many books? Why are there so many conferences? Why are there so many programs about leadership? And I think the simple answer is because we're not there yet. Society at large still has a ton to learn whenever it comes to true leadership value. We're getting there, but it's a journey.
It's almost at times, to your point, at least again, my experience is much of society many times works against us moving towards that leadership aspect in that regard. And yeah, I love what you're saying because I experience a bit similarly, I think, to what you're describing. Just sitting down to discuss leadership, people are either uncomfortable or they just don't want to go there or don't feel it's very valuable of their time, of giving their time or thought process. And I've come to appreciate Dr. Mason, and I truly believe you're there as well through our discussions, the work with your doctoral study and more, is leadership is where everything starts and stops at.
Yes, Dr. Maxwell said it probably better than anybody. Everything rises and falls on the shoulders of leadership. That's not just the good stuff. It has to be all encompassing. So whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's indifferent, the leader is front center stage, and they have to be responsible for that.
And from just a faith injection, if you don't mind, and for those watching and listening, please, just a perspective I have as I've worked on a choice I've made to move closer to God later in life, largely thanks to him showing me where I need to be and to clarifying the purpose of life. When I think back at Jesus's time on earth, everything he did was just laying out leadership. He put together the first true succession plan, right, with the disciples for carrying on after he was gone. And that's an area just I'm going to shift off to just a little sidebar. There's not enough organizations that really put the time and effort in that we could learn from him to build a succession plan to where that consistency and constancy of purpose can stick longer term. Talk about your experience in the manufacturing world. And when I was in manufacturing, it's been 20 years now, Dr. Mason, our company was really committed to succession planning. Is that still a term? Is that still something companies give credence to today?
It is. However, I've not been with very many companies that truly practice it well. I think it's one of those elements where we talk about it, but it's tough to nail down. And I think it also starts with the leader, because for the leader to talk about succession, they have to own the idea that they're being replaced. And if they're not comfortable in their own skin, that's a conversation that's very difficult to have.
Well said in that regard. There's another component you mentioned a moment ago, and thank you for sharing the example of where you went to your team and just laid it out. Folks, there's an error here and it's on me, need your help to fix it in that piece. That's being very vulnerable. It's being very transparent. Talk a little bit, because some of the things I see from leadership today that's really concerning to me, it seems like we've taken transparency and leaders are, I don't think they're unintentionally misinterpreting it, but I think they're using transparency outside of where the intent and the value can fully work within the organization.
Transparency is not easy. And I don't think you have to be a person that lies to struggle with transparency, because transparency is connected to ownership. And that level of, again, using the word vulnerability, I don't think transparency is necessarily just about honesty. You can be an honest person and not own your mistakes. You just don't talk about it. You just don't advertise it. And sometimes just not talking about it can imply it's someone else's problem. And if everybody buys it, I got off the hook. But I still know when I put my head on my pillow at night whether it was me or not. So transparency is the doorway, I think, to transforming relationships. And that's really what leadership is. And that's a key fundamental piece that I believe is missing in many contexts. That leadership, the thing that separates leadership from management, is the relationship aspect. And I missed that for many years in my career, until I was finally taught by someone and learned that as a leader, we have to value relationships and results. I'm a very results-driven guy. Personality, my hardwiring is results. You want something executed or done, give it to me. I'll either do it myself or delegate it, build the team to do it. And that has allowed me to achieve a lot of success and career growth over the last 2 decades. I didn't learn or start learning until about 2016, until I went through an executive training program that completely stripped me down to ground zero and rebuilt who I was. And that was where I obtained the awareness that relationships matter. And if you don't build relationships correctly first, you're going to struggle with the results.
Well said, and so true. And Dr. Mason, I want to pick up on that next week when you come back. Great words of wisdom. Next week, when you join us with Dr. Mason, we're going to talk more about relationships. We're going to get to know a bit about the people, the tools that have helped Dr. Jerry Mason develop into the successful and effective leader that he has become. Dr. Mason, my friend, God bless you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking part this week.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
And thank you for watching. For Dr. Jerry Mason, I'm Kevin Smith. Just reminding you, while life pushes us and tries to have us go quicker and quicker, faster and faster, our growth, our success, and our opportunity to bring value to others, it all occurs around still. God bless you. We love you.